Hey everybody, we're going to start with our content thinking about the number line and integers on the number line. So you have your notes, they are attached in Schoology. You should probably have the two screens going, one with this video and the other with our notes. And you can take notes either by typing or by hand, however works for you, on today's lesson. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is counting up and counting down on the number line. And this is probably review for you, so I'm going to move a little quickly. If we are using the number line to count up, we always start at 0. And if we're counting our up and starting at 0, this corresponds to positive numbers. If we start at 0 and we count down, this corresponds to negative numbers. Makes sense, right? If we're counting up, we're going to the right to our positive numbers, and if we're going down, we're going to the left to the negative numbers. So let's take a look at this number line. Question A says, where do you begin when locating on the number line, a number on the number line? Where do you begin? Well, always, even if we're graphing in a coordinate plane later when we talk about algebra, we always begin at 0. We start at 0. Then the next question says, what do you call the distance between a number line and 0, or I'm sorry, between a number and 0 on the number line? So let's say I wanted to find the distance between 0 and 4. I would count the spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Well, the distance between a number and 0 on a number line is called the absolute value. And in math, we use the absolute value to talk about the distance between a number and 0, and we use the notation, if I want to find the distance between 4 and 0, I say, what is the absolute value of 4? And the unit is spaces, so the absolute value of 4 is 4. You might have learned somewhere a trick that absolute value is always positive, and that's true because distance is always positive. So the next thing says, what is the relationship between 7 and negative 7? So I have 7 here and negative 7 here. What is the relationship between those things? Well, it might be hard to tell at first, right? Because we have a negative number and we have a positive number. But there is a relationship between those. The relationship, let's think about the absolute values of them. The distance between 0 and positive 7 is 7. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. And then the distance between 0 and negative 7 is also 7 spaces. So the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So they have the same absolute value, but they are opposite numbers, right? So they're the same distance from 0, but one is positive and one is negative. Take a second, pause the video if you need to fill in your notes here. Okay, so the next example, we've got something called the integer game. And when we're in person, we're going to play this integer game virtually on our iPads. But the idea of the integer game is that we always want to try to get to 0. So the player who gets to 0 first wins. So let's take a look at this question. If these were our cards, if we had a 5, a negative 5, a negative 4, and 8, what's the sum of the card values shown, right? So if I want to find the sum of 5, -5, -4, and 8, I'm also thinking about a number sentence that looks like 5 plus -5 plus -4 plus 8, because sum means to add, right? So if I'm finding the sum, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move on the number line the distance that it tells me to move, right? So because this is a +5, I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go 5 spaces to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that puts me there. But then I have plus -5. So now I have to move to the left or count down -5 spaces. So I'm going to start at 5, and I'm going to go 5 spaces to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, now I'm back at 0. So I did 5 and -5. Now I have to count down to -4 spaces. So I'm going back 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm at -4. But the last space, or the last add-end, says +8, which means I'm going to start at -4, and I'm going to move to the right 8 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the number where I end up is +4. So if I end at +4, and the goal of the integer game is to get back to 0, what card or cards would I have to draw from the pile to go from +4 back to 0? Take a second, the video will pause, and enter your best guess. Well, if I'm starting at 4 and I need to get back to 0, I need to actually get a -4 card so that I can move left 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you notice the relationship between +4 and -4? Keep that in the back of your mind. All right, now you're going to have a second to think about the number line below and using something called the additive inverse. The additive inverse is the idea that when you combine a positive and negative number with the same absolute value, you will always get 0. So let's take a look at this. The first one says, how far is 7 from 0 and in which direction? Well, if I'm thinking about 7 and 0, we've already done this example kind of. We're going from 0 to 7. That's 7 spaces. And it's to the right. What's the opposite of 7? Well, if this is +7, the opposite, the same absolute value on the opposite side of the number line, would be -7. And the last question says, how far is -7 from 0 and in what direction? Well, -7's right here. It's to the left. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces. So the idea is that the additive inverse means that we're moving in opposite directions on the number line, and they all equal 0. Take a second and pause if you need to fill in any more notes. Okay, we're actually going to skip D, and we'll go on to this question where you'll pause and think. What does this tell us about the sum of 7 and its opposite, -7? If I were to add 7 plus -7 on the number line, if I were to move right 7 and then back 7, where would that put me on the number line? Well, if you answered the sum would be 0, you're exactly right. Okay, F says look at the curved arrows you drew for 7 and -7. What relationship exists between these two arrows that would support your claim about the sum of 7 and -7? there are a couple things we could answer here. We could say that their distance from 0 is the same. Even though they're opposites. So because they're the same, when you go forwards and backwards the same amount, you'll end up at your starting point at 0. So now, ask yourself, do you think this will hold true for the sum of any number and its opposite? Well, why? If I add 6 plus negative 6, or 432 plus negative 432, or negative 15 plus 15, will I always get 0? Well, why do you think so? If you said yes, you will always get 0, you are absolutely right. Because the additive inverse tells us for every number a, there is a number negative a, so that a plus negative a is equal to 0, or negative a plus a is equal to 0, just like we saw here. Put it in another way, the additive inverse of a number is a number such that the sum of the two numbers is 0. So, for example, the opposite of 3 is negative 3, and 3 plus negative 3 is 0. Hence, negative 3 is the additive inverse of 3. Pretty easy, right? So if I have 4, the additive inverse of 4 is negative 4. Or if I have 13, the additive inverse of 13 is negative 13. And there you go, our first lesson in 7th grade math.